Welcome back. Get comfortable once again. Settle into your space, adjust your pillows, and let yourself relax. Tonight, we're going to explore ecology together. Not as a test, not as something to memorize, but as a gentle journey through the relationships that connect all living things on Earth. Ecology is the study of connections. Connections between organisms, connections between life and the physical world, connections that stretch from the smallest microbe to entire continents. Over the next 2 hours, we'll explore these relationships at every scale. There's no pressure to remember everything. Just listen and let the information flow over you like water. Ecology, though a term many have encountered, is often more elusive to define with precision. At its core, it is the study of how living organisms interact with one another, as well as with the non-living elements of their surroundings. In essence, it is the science of relationships, both among organisms and between organisms and the physical world that sustains them. The principal aim of ecology is to understand where and why living things occur where they do, and in what numbers. Achieving this understanding requires drawing from a broad range of scientific fields. Disciplines such as biochemistry, physiology, and molecular biology all contribute to this pursuit, as do broader studies in evolution, biodiversity, geology, and climatology. There is also a role for chemistry and physics, particularly when ecological studies require modeling or predictive analysis. Mathematics, after all, tends to show up at any party involving serious thought. Ecologists approach their subject through 4 main lenses: the organismal, the population, the community, and the ecosystem levels. At the organismal level, the focus is on how individual beings respond to and interact with their immediate environment. Moving up, the population level investigates changes in populations over time. Why, for example, a species may thrive in one decade and decline in the next. The community level examines how multiple species interact, often in complex and unexpected ways. Finally, ecosystem ecology takes the broadest view, considering both living biotic and non-living abiotic components, things like water, soil, and air, as an integrated whole. Beyond the academic intrigue, ecology has practical value. Understanding ecological systems helps society address basic needs, securing food, maintaining shelter, and improving public health. Ecologists do their work in a range of settings, from laboratories to the field, and those fields can be remarkably diverse. From the quiet stream behind a university to the scalding vents on the ocean floor. Applied ecology also plays a role in resource management. Populations such as white-tailed deer may be studied and managed for hunting, while timber stands of aspen are monitored for sustainable paper production. Ecologists take on a variety of roles, including that of educator, teaching across universities, schools, museums, and nature centers. Others serve in advisory capacities, shaping or crafting policy at multiple levels of government. Some do both. Becoming an ecologist typically starts with an undergraduate degree in a natural science, followed by more focused training or an advanced degree depending on one's specialty. A solid grasp of the physical sciences, mathematics, and statistics is essential, which is unfortunate for anyone hoping to avoid numbers altogether. On a planetary scale, many forces, both living and non-living, shape life as we know it. The biosphere, while vast to any one of us, occupies only the most modest sliver of the known universe. It stretches several kilometers into the sky and reaches into the deepest parts of the oceans. Its contents, communities of life, are molded by climate, geography, and other abiotic factors, which together dictate which organisms will be found where. And so, while ecology may start with questions about beetles and bushes, it ends with insights about life itself. Biogeography is the study of where living things occur across the globe, and the non-living or abiotic factors that shape those patterns. These abiotic factors, things like temperature and rainfall, vary largely with latitude and elevation. As these environmental conditions shift, so too do the plant and animal communities they support. Imagine setting off on a walk from the equator, heading north. Initially, you'd find yourself in tropical wet forests where broad-leafed evergreen trees dominate. As you move farther from the equator, these give way to seasonally dry forests where trees become more scattered. The air becomes drier, the temperature begins to shift. And by the time you reach around 30 degrees north latitude, deserts begin to appear, defined primarily by their low rainfall. Keep going north, and deserts yield to grasslands or prairies. And in turn, those are replaced by temperate forests, where the trees shed their leaves each year. Moving farther still, you reach the boreal forests of the sub-Arctic. Finally, at the top of this latitudinal ladder, you find yourself in the Arctic tundra, home to only the hardiest species, adapted to the most punishing conditions. This gradual transition mirrors not only the shift in climate, but also the succession of species finely tuned to those changing environments. And yet, similar changes in ecosystem types can be found even without shifting latitude. And just walk up a mountain and you'll encounter a comparable gradient. Mountains create their own microclimates, their own zones of life stacked vertically rather than spread horizontally. At the base of a mountain in the tropics, you might find rainforest. Climb higher and you pass through cloud forests, perpetually shrouded in mist, where epiphytes drape every branch. Higher still, the trees become shorter, more gnarled, adapted to thinner air and harsher winds. Eventually, you reach the tree line, beyond which only grasses and small shrubs can survive. And at the summit, if high enough, you find permanent ice and snow, a polar environment at the equator. This phenomenon, known as elevational zonation, demonstrates that temperature and moisture, not latitude alone, determine which organisms can thrive in a given location. A high mountain in Ecuador can host tundra-like conditions merely kilometers from tropical lowlands. The principle remains constant. Organisms are distributed according to the environmental conditions they can tolerate. Interestingly, ecosystems at the same latitude don't always resemble one another. Air and ocean currents like the jet stream and the Gulf Stream help explain why. Climate is a global game, with many players. The west coast of North America, for instance, experiences a Mediterranean climate in California, but temperate rainforest conditions in British Columbia, despite being at similar latitudes. Ocean currents moderate temperatures, bringing warmth or coolness, depending on their origin. The Gulf Stream carries warm water from the Caribbean northward along the eastern coast of North America and then across the Atlantic toward Europe. This circulation pattern helps keep Western Europe significantly warmer than comparable latitudes in North America. London at 51 degrees north enjoys milder winters than Winnipeg at 50 degrees north, largely thanks to oceanic heat transport. Ecologists interested in biogeography examine these patterns of species distribution. No species is truly ubiquitous. Take the Venus flytrap, for instance. It's found naturally only in a limited region of North and South Carolina. Such a species is referred to as endemic, restricted to a particular geographic area. In contrast, generalists like the raccoon range widely, in this case across most of North and Central America. The distribution of species is shaped over long evolutionary timescales, influenced by both biotic interactions and the physical environment. Biogeography has been intertwined with evolutionary theory since the 18th century, as researchers noticed that the most distinct groupings of plants and animals were often found in regions that had been geographically isolated for millions of years. Australia is perhaps the textbook example. It's estimated to harbor between 600,000 and 700,000 species of plants and animals. Roughly 3/4 of its plant and mammal species are endemic. They occur nowhere else on Earth. The isolation has been remarkably effective at keeping outsiders out and insiders in. When Australia separated from the ancient supercontinent Gondwana approximately 45 million years ago, it carried with it a unique assemblage of life. Marsupials, which were widespread across the southern continents at that time, found themselves isolated on an island continent with few placental mammal competitors. Over millions of years, they diversified into the kangaroos, koalas, wombats, and countless other species that now define Australian wildlife. The absence of certain groups can be as revealing as their presence. Australia has no native hoofed mammals, no native cats or bears, and no native monkeys. The ecological niches filled by these groups on other continents were instead occupied by marsupials and, in some cases, by birds and reptiles. The result is an ecosystem that functions much like those elsewhere, but with a radically different cast of characters. Sometimes understanding where species aren't found is just as revealing. Hawaii, for example, has no native land reptiles or amphibians, and only one native land mammal, the Hawaiian bat. New Guinea offers another case with a notable absence of placental mammals across most of the island. Island biogeography, the study of species distribution on islands, reveals patterns that help explain biodiversity more broadly. Islands, by their nature, are isolated. Species must arrive by flying, swimming, floating on debris, or being carried by wind or birds. Once they arrive, they find themselves in a simplified ecosystem with fewer competitors and predators than on the mainland. This can lead to rapid evolutionary change. Without the pressures that shaped their ancestors, island species often evolve in unexpected directions. They may become larger or smaller. Flightless birds are common on islands where terrestrial predators are absent. Plants may lose their defensive structures when herbivores are scarce. The Galapagos Islands, made famous by Charles Darwin, exemplify these principles. Finches that arrived from the mainland diversified into more than a dozen species, each adapted to different food sources. Giant tortoises evolved in the absence of large predators. Marine iguanas became the world's only seafaring lizards, diving into the ocean to graze on algae. But island species are also vulnerable. Their populations are small, their habitats limited, and they've often lost the adaptations needed to compete with or escape from introduced species. When humans arrive on islands, bringing rats, cats, pigs, and other animals, the results are often catastrophic for native wildlife. Plants follow the same generalist and endemic pattern. Isolated land masses like Australia, Hawaii, and Madagascar often boast a high number of endemic plant species. While biologically fascinating, this also makes them vulnerable. Take the forest gardenia, or Gardenia brighami, which is native only to Hawaii. It's estimated that only 15 to 20 individual trees remain, an unfortunate testament to the fragile beauty of the endemic. Madagascar, separated from Africa for 88 million years and from India for 85 million years, has followed a similar path to Australia. Roughly 90% of its species are found nowhere else on Earth. Lemurs, a group of primates found only on Madagascar, diversified into more than 100 species. The island's plants are equally unique, with entire families of flowering plants endemic to its forests. These patterns of endemism and distribution aren't static. They continue to evolve, shaped by ongoing processes of speciation, extinction, and environmental change. Climate change, in particular, is now reshaping biogeographic patterns at an unprecedented rate. Species are shifting their ranges poleward and upslope as temperatures rise. Some are adapting, others are declining, and still others are going extinct. Their narrow ecological requirements incompatible with a rapidly changing world. Solar energy, the original currency of nearly all life, is captured by green plants, algae, cyanobacteria, and photosynthetic protists. These organisms convert sunlight into chemical energy, which then fuels the biological processes of everything else that breathes, swims, crawls, or grows. Notably, the availability of light itself can influence the evolutionary trajectory of photosynthesizers. For instance, plants growing beneath the dense canopy of a temperate forest must contend with significant shading. As trees above leaf out fully in the late spring, the understory is plunged into shadow. To survive this annual dimming, understory plants have evolved particular strategies. One notable approach is the rapid life cycle of spring ephemerals, such as the spring beauty. These plants grow quickly and reproduce early in the season, taking full advantage of the brief window of full sunlight before the canopy closes overhead. Spring ephemerals are masters of timing. They emerge in early spring, sometimes pushing through snow, and rapidly develop leaves, flowers, and fruits within a matter of weeks. By the time the canopy trees have fully leafed out and blocked the sunlight, these understory plants have already completed their above-ground growth. They retreat below ground, storing energy in bulbs, corms, or rhizomes, where they'll wait out the shaded months until spring returns. This strategy is remarkably efficient but requires precise timing. If the plants emerge too early, a late frost might kill them. If they emerge too late, they might miss the window of available light. Climate change is now disrupting these carefully calibrated schedules, with spring arriving earlier in many regions. Some plants are adapting by shifting their emergence dates. Others are struggling to keep pace. And in aquatic systems, the problem of limited light takes on a different character. Water absorbs sunlight, as do plants, suspended particles, and countless microorganisms drifting through the currents. The deeper one goes into a lake, pond, or ocean, the dimmer it gets until eventually no light at all can penetrate. In these aphotic zones, photosynthesis becomes impossible. Different wavelengths of light penetrate water to different depths. Red light is absorbed quickly, typically within the first few meters. Orange and yellow follow soon after. Blue and green light penetrate deepest, which is why deep water often appears blue-green. Photosynthetic organisms living at different depths have evolved pigments tuned to capture the wavelengths available at their particular depth. Red algae, for example, contain pigments called phycobilins that absorb blue and green light efficiently. This allows them to photosynthesize at greater depths than green algae, which rely primarily on chlorophyll and thus require the full spectrum of light available near the surface. In response, aquatic life has developed various adaptations. Some plants keep their photosynthetic tissues close to the water's surface. A classic example is the water lily, with its broad, floating leaves basking in the sun. These plants are, in a very literal sense, dead in the water without sunlight. Other aquatic plants have evolved different solutions. Submerged plants often have thin, finely divided leaves that maximize surface area for light absorption while minimizing the distance light must travel through plant tissue. Some species can adjust the density and orientation of their leaves in response to changing light levels. In deeper or murkier water, they produce more chlorophyll and position their leaves horizontally to capture as much of the available light as possible. Elsewhere, in the absolute absence of light, say at the base of hydrothermal vents, some bacteria have gone a different route altogether, extracting energy from inorganic chemicals. No sunlight required. Evolution, in this case, was not deterred by the dark. These chemosynthetic organisms represent one of the most remarkable adaptations in the living world. They use chemical energy, often from hydrogen sulfide or methane, to power the same basic process of carbon fixation that photosynthetic organisms accomplish with sunlight. The discovery of thriving ecosystems around hydrothermal vents in the late 1970s revolutionized our understanding of where and how life could exist. At these vents, superheated water laden with dissolved minerals erupts from the seafloor. Bacteria harvest energy from the chemical reactions between these minerals and the surrounding seawater. These bacteria, in turn, support entire communities of organisms, including tube worms, clams, crabs, and fish, all living in complete darkness, completely disconnected from the sun-driven ecosystems at the surface. This discovery has profound implications beyond Earth. If life can thrive without sunlight in the deep ocean, it might also exist in the dark oceans beneath the ice of Europa or Enceladus, moons of Jupiter and Saturn. The requirements for life, it turns out, are more flexible than once thought. Beyond light, nutrient availability is another critical factor in aquatic energy dynamics. In the open ocean, when organisms die, they often sink to the bottom, carrying their nutrient load with them. Unless something stirs the depths, these nutrients remain sequestered far below the reach of photosynthetic life. Enter ocean upwelling. This process is driven by winds blowing along coastal waters. As surface water is pushed offshore, deeper waters rise to take its place. With this upward flow comes a return of nutrients from long-dead organisms, offering a fresh supply to fuel the next cycle of life. Upwelling zones are among the most productive ecosystems on Earth. The west coasts of continents, particularly off Peru, California, and West Africa, experience strong upwelling driven by trade winds. The deep water that rises to the surface is cold and rich in nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. When this nutrient-laden water enters the sunlit surface zone, it triggers explosive growth of phytoplankton. These microscopic photosynthetic organisms form the base of a food web that supports some of the world's largest fisheries. Anchovies off the coast of Peru, sardines off California, and countless other species depend on the productivity generated by upwelling. When upwelling weakens, as it does during El Niño events, the consequences ripple through entire ecosystems and economies. Freshwater systems, though smaller in scale, operate under a similar principle of nutrient recycling, albeit with a seasonal rhythm. In many northern lakes, nutrient redistribution is driven by changes in air temperature and the resulting formation and breakdown of a thermocline, a distinct layer in the water column where temperature differs sharply from surrounding layers. During winter, lake surfaces may freeze over, creating a barrier that blocks oxygen exchange with the air. Beneath the ice, the water remains slightly warmer, with the warmest and densest layer resting at the bottom, around 4 to 5 degrees Celsius. But this deeper layer is also oxygen poor. As decomposition continues to consume what little oxygen remains, and the surface ice prevents new oxygen from entering. Come spring, temperatures rise, the ice melts, and the surface water warms to 4 degrees Celsius, matching the density of the bottom layer. This causes the surface water to sink and displace the deeper nutrient-laden water, which in turn rises to the top. The result is a thorough mixing of water layers and nutrients known as spring turnover. Spring turnover is a critical event in the annual cycle of temperate lakes. The nutrients brought to the surface trigger a spring bloom of phytoplankton, which in turn supports zooplankton, fish, and other aquatic life. This pulse of productivity sets the stage for the growing season ahead. Summer then arrives with its characteristic thermal stratification, warmer water on the surface, cooler layers below. The warm surface layer, called the epilimnion, is well lit and well oxygenated but nutrient poor. The cold bottom layer, the hypolimnion, is nutrient rich but dark and increasingly oxygen depleted as decomposition proceeds. Between them lies the thermocline, a zone of rapid temperature change that acts as a barrier, preventing mixing. This stratification can last for months, with the surface layer becoming progressively more nutrient depleted and the bottom layer more oxygen depleted. In some lakes, particularly those receiving excess nutrients from human activities, the bottom waters can become completely anoxic, devoid of oxygen, creating dead zones where most aquatic life cannot survive. As autumn progresses and temperatures drop, surface waters cool once again to around 4 degrees Celsius, becoming heavy enough to sink and initiate a second mixing, the fall turnover. This seasonal shuffle brings oxygen from the surface to the lake bottom and lifts nutrients back up. Fall turnover is often less dramatic than spring turnover because decomposition has already consumed much of the available organic matter. However, it remains essential for replenishing oxygen in the deep waters and redistributing nutrients. Some lakes experience a fall phytoplankton bloom, though it's typically smaller than the spring bloom. But once winter sets in, the surface freezes, isolating the lake once more. Decomposers and bottom-dwelling organisms slowly consume the available oxygen, biding their time until spring returns to stir the waters again. Not all lakes follow this pattern. Shallow lakes may mix continuously throughout the year, driven by wind. Tropical lakes may never stratify at all, or may stratify based on factors other than temperature. Very deep lakes may stratify permanently, with the bottom waters never mixing with the surface. Lake Tanganyika in East Africa, one of the world's deepest lakes, is permanently stratified. Its bottom waters have not mixed with the surface for centuries, possibly millennia. These deep waters are anoxic and accumulate hydrogen sulfide, making them toxic to most life. Only the upper few hundred meters support a diverse ecosystem, including hundreds of endemic fish species. Temperature influences life at every level, from the activity of enzymes within a cell to the range of a species across a continent. At the biochemical level, temperature directly affects the function and stability of enzymes, which are crucial for all metabolic processes. Most enzymes perform optimally within a narrow temperature band. Below freezing, metabolism slows to a crawl or stops altogether. Above about 45 degrees Celsius, enzymes begin to degrade, disrupting the delicate choreography of life. This is why relatively few organisms are found in extreme thermal environments, although of course exceptions exist. Enzymes are proteins, and proteins are held in their functional shapes by weak chemical bonds. Temperature affects the kinetic energy of molecules. At low temperatures, these molecules move slowly, and enzymatic reactions proceed sluggishly. As temperature rises, molecular motion increases, and reactions speed up. But if temperature rises too high, the weak bonds holding proteins together begin to break. The enzyme loses its shape and with it, its function. This process, called denaturation, is usually irreversible. For most organisms, there's a relatively narrow range of temperatures in which all their thousands of enzymes function adequately. This range defines the organism's thermal tolerance. Some organisms, extremophiles, have evolved enzymes that function at temperatures that would destroy typical enzymes. Thermophilic bacteria living in hot springs have enzymes that remain stable at temperatures exceeding 90 degrees Celsius. Psychrophilic organisms in Antarctic waters have enzymes that work efficiently just above freezing. These adaptations come at a cost. Thermophilic enzymes don't work well at moderate temperatures, and psychrophilic enzymes fail in warm environments. Each adaptation represents a trade-off, a specialization for particular conditions. To survive, organisms must either regulate their internal temperatures or restrict themselves to environments where external conditions fall within tolerable limits. Some animals have evolved mechanisms to endure fluctuations, such as hibernation in winter or torpor in reptiles. Certain bacteria, known as extremophiles, have taken things a step further, thriving in places like geysers and hydrothermal vents, where heat would destroy most other forms of life. Endothermic animals, commonly called warm-blooded, generate heat internally through metabolism. Birds and mammals fall into this category. They maintain relatively constant body temperatures regardless of environmental conditions, at least within limits. This allows them to remain active in cold environments, where ectothermic animals would become sluggish or dormant. But endothermy requires a substantial investment of energy. An endothermic animal must consume far more food than an ectothermic animal of similar size. Much of that food is burned simply to maintain body temperature. In cold environments, this cost increases. Animals must either eat more, increase their insulation, or reduce their activity. Many endothermic animals have evolved thick fur, feathers, or layers of fat to reduce heat loss. Behavioral adaptations help as well. Huddling together reduces exposed surface area. Seeking shelter from wind lowers the effective temperature. Some species migrate to avoid the coldest months entirely. Ectothermic animals, often called cold-blooded, rely on external sources of heat to regulate their body temperature. Reptiles, amphibians, fish, and invertebrates generally fall into this category. On a cool morning, a lizard basks in the sun to warm up. On a hot afternoon, it retreats to shade to avoid overheating. This strategy has advantages and disadvantages. Ectotherms require far less food than endotherms because they don't burn energy maintaining a constant temperature. A snake can survive on a fraction of the food that a mammal of equivalent size would need. This makes ectothermy advantageous in environments where food is scarce or unpredictable. However, ectotherms are constrained by environmental temperature. When it's cold, they're sluggish. When it's very cold, they become completely inactive. This limits their geographic range and their activity patterns. Few reptiles live in truly cold climates, and those that do spend much of the year dormant. Temperature also plays a central role in defining where organisms can live. Migration is one strategy many species employ to cope with seasonal changes. This movement from one habitat to another allows animals to escape inhospitable temperatures, find food, or secure breeding grounds. The Arctic tern, for instance, embarks on a staggering 40,000-kilometer annual round trip between the polar north and the southern oceans. Monarch butterflies make their way from the eastern United States to Mexico, each year in search of more temperate conditions. Even large mammals such as reindeer migrate long distances, about 5,000 kilometers annually, in search of sustenance. These migrations are marvels of navigation and endurance. Arctic terns experience more daylight than any other animal on Earth, following summer from pole to pole. Monarchs, despite weighing less than a gram and having a lifespan measured in weeks, complete journeys of thousands of kilometers using internal compasses calibrated to the sun and Earth's magnetic field. But migration is not without risk. The journey demands enormous energy. Predators wait along migration routes. Habitats at both ends must remain suitable, as climate change alters seasonal patterns and human development fragments. Habitats. Many migratory species are struggling. Reptiles and amphibians are somewhat more restricted in their distribution, in part because they lack the mobility required for migration. And not all animals capable of migrating choose to do so. The journey itself is fraught with risk and demands a considerable expenditure of energy. For some animals, endurance is the preferred solution. Hibernation enables survival through cold periods by dramatically reducing metabolic activity. A related process, estivation, allows animals to weather periods of intense heat and drought. Both are forms of torpor, a state of lowered physiological activity that allows an organism to wait out adverse conditions. Hibernating animals don't simply fall asleep. They undergo profound physiological changes. Heart rate drops dramatically, sometimes to just a few beats per minute. Breathing slows. Body temperature falls sometimes to just above freezing. Metabolic rate can decline to less than 5% of normal. This state is not without danger. If an animal enters hibernation with insufficient fat reserves, it may not survive the winter. If disturbed repeatedly, the energy cost of warming up can deplete reserves. And hibernating animals are vulnerable to predators, though most choose hibernation sites that offer protection. Ground squirrels, for example, hibernate in underground burrows where temperature remains relatively stable. Bears, despite common belief, don't truly hibernate. They enter a lighter state of torpor in which body temperature drops only slightly, and they can be roused relatively easily. Female bears can even give birth and nurse cubs while in this state. Estivation serves a similar purpose, but in response to heat and dryness rather than cold. Many desert animals estivate during the hottest, driest months. Certain frogs and toads burrow into mud and enter a dormant state, waiting for rain to return. Some snails seal their shells with a dried mucous membrane and estivate for months or even years. Among the more curious adaptations is the ability of the wood frog to survive freezing temperatures. Using an antifreeze-like substance within its cells, which protects cellular integrity and prevents ice crystals from rupturing membranes. Not exactly cozy, but effective. The wood frog's adaptation is truly remarkable. As temperatures drop below freezing, up to 70% of the water in its body freezes solid. Its heart stops beating, blood stops flowing, breathing ceases. By any conventional measure, the frog is dead. But it's not. The secret lies in glucose, As ice begins to form, the frog's liver produces massive amounts of glucose and distributes it throughout the body. This glucose acts as a cryoprotectant, preventing ice crystals from forming inside cells. Ice forms between cells in the body cavity, in the bladder, everywhere except where it would cause fatal damage. When spring arrives and temperatures rise, the ice melts. The heart begins to beat. Blood flows. The frog thaws from the inside out, and within hours is hopping away, apparently none the worse for its frozen interlude. This ability allows wood frogs to live farther north than any other North American amphibian, well into the Arctic Circle. Scientists are intensely interested in understanding this process. If we could replicate it, we might be able to preserve organs for transplant indefinitely, or even enable human suspended animation for long space voyages. The wood frog, a small amphibian often overlooked, may hold keys to technologies we can barely imagine. Plant growth and the total production of organic matter depend heavily on two key environmental factors: temperature and moisture. These two variables govern a plant's capacity to perform photosynthesis, which in turn determines how much energy is available for the rest of the ecosystem. The concept of net primary productivity, the amount of carbon fixed through photosynthesis minus the amount lost through respiration, provides a measure of how much organic material remains to be used as food. In terrestrial ecosystems, this is typically gauged by assessing the above-ground biomass per unit area, all the plant mass you can see, though it notably excludes roots and any other hidden growth below the soil line. This leads to a slight understatement of productivity in systems with deep or extensive root networks. Grasslands, for instance, often allocate more biomass below ground than above. A prairie might appear modest, knee-high grasses swaying in the wind, but below the surface lies a dense mat of roots and rhizomes that can extend several meters deep and account for more than half the plant's total mass. These extensive root systems serve multiple functions: anchoring plants against wind, storing energy and nutrients, allowing regrowth after fire or grazing, and improving soil structure. Similarly, many desert plants invest heavily in deep roots to access groundwater far below the surface. A mesquite tree's roots can reach 15 meters or more in depth, far exceeding the height of the tree itself. This hidden productivity is difficult to measure, but represents a significant portion of the plant's energy allocation. The environments that boast the highest levels of biomass are, perhaps unsurprisingly, those that are both warm and wet. These conditions create a kind of botanical ideal. Photosynthesis occurs rapidly. Enzymatic reactions hum along efficiently. And stomata, the tiny pores in leaves responsible for gas exchange, can remain open to take in carbon dioxide without excessive water loss. This trifecta ensures maximal biomass production. The lush growth above ground then provides both habitat and nourishment for a wide variety of animal life. Tropical rainforests represent the pinnacle of terrestrial productivity. With year-round warmth, abundant rainfall, and intense sunlight, these ecosystems can produce more than 2 kilograms of biomass per square meter per year. The result is the towering, multi-layered forests that harbor much of Earth's terrestrial biodiversity. On the other end of the spectrum, environments that are dry, cold, or both tend to limit plant growth. With slower photosynthesis and lower energy input, less biomass is produced. This scarcity ripples through the food chain, resulting in sparser and more specialized animal populations. Arctic tundra, for example, might produce only 100 grams of biomass per square meter per year, 20 times less than a tropical rainforest. The growing season is short, temperatures are low, and even though summer brings continuous daylight, the sun remains low on the horizon, reducing its intensity. The result is a landscape of low-growing plants, limited animal diversity, and food webs with few levels. Deserts face a different constraint. Temperature may be adequate, even excessive, but water is scarce. Without water, stomata must close to prevent desiccation, but closed stomata can't take in carbon dioxide. Photosynthesis grinds to a halt. Most desert plants are active only after rains, spending much of the year dormant. Beyond temperature and moisture, the availability of inorganic nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus also plays a pivotal role in determining where plants can grow and how robustly. These nutrients are drawn from the soil as water moves through plant roots. Soil characteristics, its particle size, pH, and nutrient content therefore have a direct influence on plant distribution. Nitrogen is particularly important because it's a key component of proteins, nucleic acids, and chlorophyll. Despite making up 78% of the atmosphere, nitrogen gas is unavailable to most organisms. It must first be converted into ammonia or nitrate through nitrogen fixation, a process carried out by specialized bacteria. Some plants, particularly legumes like clover, beans, and acacia trees, have evolved partnerships with nitrogen-fixing bacteria. The bacteria live in nodules on the plant's roots, fixing atmospheric nitrogen and sharing it with the plant. In return, the plant provides the bacteria with sugars produced through photosynthesis. This mutualism allows legumes to thrive in nitrogen-poor soils where other plants struggle. Phosphorus, while needed in smaller quantities, is often the limiting nutrient in aquatic ecosystems. Unlike nitrogen, which cycles through the atmosphere, phosphorus has a slow geological cycle. It's released from rocks through weathering, taken up by organisms, and eventually deposited in sediments. On human timescales, phosphorus is essentially non-renewable. Many of the world's most productive agricultural regions have soils naturally rich in phosphorus, often from ancient marine sediments or volcanic ash. Where phosphorus is scarce, crop production requires fertilization. Industrial agriculture now mines phosphorus from finite deposits and applies it to fields, fundamentally altering the natural phosphorus cycle. Since animals obtain these nutrients secondhand by consuming plants or other animals, their distributions closely follow the availability of suitable food sources. In some cases, this connection becomes dynamic, with animals actively tracking the movements of their dietary staples as they shift across the landscape. Herbivores in particular are constrained by plant distribution. Koalas eat almost exclusively eucalyptus leaves, limiting them to eucalyptus forests. Giant pandas feed primarily on bamboo, restricting them to bamboo forests. Even generalist herbivores like deer and elk are limited by the availability of edible vegetation. Carnivores, in turn, are limited by the distribution of their prey. As herbivore populations shift in response to changing vegetation, predator populations follow. The relationship cascades through ecosystems, with each trophic level constrained by the one below it. Water, indispensable for all living things, plays a central role in the most fundamental cellular processes. On land, organisms face the persistent threat of water loss through simple diffusion. To cope, they've developed a variety of adaptations to retain moisture. Many animals, for example, are covered in oily or waxy coatings that serve as moisture barriers. Plants, too, are not without their tricks. Their leaves often boast waxy cuticles and fine hairs, both features that help minimize water loss by slowing the process of transpiration. The cuticle on plant leaves is a remarkable structure. It's composed primarily of cutin, a waxy polymer that's essentially waterproof. Some desert plants have cuticles so thick they give leaves a gray or silvery appearance. Others are covered in dense hairs that trap a layer of still, humid air next to the leaf surface, reducing the gradient that drives water loss. Cacti have taken water conservation to an extreme. Most have eliminated leaves entirely, reducing surface area and thus transpiration. Photosynthesis occurs in the stem, which is typically ribbed or pleated to allow expansion as water is stored. The familiar spines of cacti are modified leaves, serving to defend against herbivores and, in some cases, to collect dew. Many cacti also employ a specialized form of photosynthesis called Km for crassulacean acid metabolism. Normal plants open their stomata during the day to take in carbon dioxide, but this also allows water to escape. Cam plants open their stomata at night when it's cooler and humidity is higher. They capture carbon dioxide and store it in organic acids, then close their stomata during the day and use the stored carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. This adaptation can reduce water loss by a factor of 10 compared to conventional photosynthesis. Interestingly, being immersed in water doesn't exempt an organism from water balance concerns. Aquatic life has its own suite of problems and solutions. Freshwater organisms, living in environments where the surrounding water has a lower solute concentration than their internal fluids, are under constant osmotic pressure. Water wants to rush in. To deal with this, these organisms must actively regulate solute levels, often by excreting large volumes of very dilute urine. Freshwater fish are constantly fighting osmosis. Water diffuses into their bodies through their gills and skin. If they didn't actively eliminate this excess water, they would swell up and their cells would burst. To prevent this, their kidneys produce copious amounts of very dilute urine, sometimes up to a third of their body weight daily. At the same time, they're losing salts to the environment. To compensate, specialized cells in their gills actively pump salts from the water into their bloodstream. Even though the concentration gradient works against them, this requires energy, a constant metabolic cost of living in fresh water. Marine organisms face the opposite issue. Salt water is more concentrated than their internal fluids, so the danger is water loss to the environment. Their adaptations go in the other direction, retaining water while excreting excess salts. A memorable example comes from the marine iguana, which deals with this by sneezing out salt-laden vapor. A surprisingly elegant solution to an unrelenting problem. Marine fish drink seawater constantly to replace water lost through osmosis. But seawater contains far more salt than they need. Specialized cells in their gills actively pump excess salt out of their bloodstream back into the ocean. Their kidneys produce small amounts of highly concentrated urine to conserve water while eliminating waste products. Marine birds and reptiles face a similar challenge. Seabirds like albatrosses and petrels drink seawater, then excrete excess salt through specialized nasal glands. These glands concentrate salt into a solution more than twice as salty as seawater, which then drips out of the bird's nostrils. Sea turtles and marine iguanas use the same strategy. Marine mammals like whales and dolphins have a different approach. They extract water from their food and metabolize fat to produce metabolic water. They don't drink seawater at all. Their kidneys are remarkably efficient, producing urine more concentrated than seawater, allowing them to maintain water balance without freshwater intake. Other abiotic factors also shape life. Oxygen, for instance, is vital in both terrestrial and aquatic environments. On land, most animals extract oxygen from the air. At high elevations, however, the thinner atmosphere contains fewer oxygen molecules, which can create challenges for respiration. At sea level, the atmosphere exerts a pressure of about 101 kilopascals, and 21% of that is oxygen. At 5,000 meters elevation, atmospheric pressure drops to about half, and while the percentage of oxygen remains 21%, the actual number of oxygen molecules per breath is roughly halved. This can cause altitude sickness in humans and limits the distribution of many species. Some animals have evolved remarkable adaptations to high altitude. Bar-headed geese migrate over the Himalayas, flying at altitudes exceeding 9,000 meters, where oxygen levels are less than a third of sea level values. They have larger lungs, more capillaries in their muscles, and hemoglobin that binds oxygen more efficiently than lowland birds. Humans living at high altitudes for generations show adaptations as well. Tibetans, for example, have genetic variants that improve oxygen delivery and reduce the blood's tendency to thicken in response to low oxygen. Andean populations have evolved larger lung capacity and more efficient oxygen utilization. Underwater, oxygen availability depends on several factors, most notably temperature and water movement. Cold, swiftly moving water holds more dissolved oxygen than warm, stagnant water. Salinity, currents, and tides also play significant roles in shaping aquatic habitats. Oxygen dissolves in water in amounts that depend on temperature, pressure, and salinity. Cold water can hold more dissolved oxygen than warm water. This is why cold water streams often support trout and salmon, fish that require high oxygen levels, while warm, sluggish rivers support different species adapted to lower oxygen. Turbulent water absorbs oxygen from the air more rapidly than still water. Waterfalls, rapids, and wave action all increase dissolved oxygen. This is one reason why rapids and riffles in streams often support higher biodiversity than quiet pools. The churning water maintains high oxygen levels that support diverse communities of insects, fish, and other organisms. Wind is another important player in the world of abiotic influences. It affects evaporation and transpiration rates, influencing how quickly water is lost from soils and plant surfaces. But wind does more than dry things out. It can transport soil, water, seeds, and even small organisms, shaping ecosystems with its sheer physical force. In coastal areas, salt spray carried by wind can determine vegetation patterns. Plants near the shore must tolerate salt, while those just a bit farther inland don't experience the same challenge. The result is often a clear zonation of plant communities, with salt-tolerant species like beach grass and sea oats closest to the water, giving way to less tolerant species farther inland. Wind also shapes plant morphology. Trees growing in windy locations often develop asymmetric crowns, with more branches on the leeward side. In extreme cases, such as at tree line on mountains or in coastal areas with constant wind, trees may grow in prostrate forms, hugging the ground to avoid the worst of the wind's effects. This growth form, called krummholz, allows trees to survive in conditions where upright growth would be impossible. Wind disperses seeds, pollen, and spores, connecting plant populations across landscapes. Many plants have evolved specialized structures for wind dispersal. Dandelion seeds have feathery parachutes. Maple seeds have wings that cause them to spin as they fall, increasing dispersal distance. These adaptations allow plants to colonize new areas and maintain gene flow between populations. Finally, fire, perhaps the most dramatic of abiotic factors, is a powerful agent of change in terrestrial ecosystems. Though destructive, fire can also be essential. Some species, like the jack pine, actually depend on the heat of fire to open their seed cones and complete reproduction. Following a fire, with vegetation cleared and competition reduced, seedlings often have a better shot at survival. Fire also releases nutrients, such as nitrogen, back into the soil through the combustion of organic matter like pine needles. Many ecosystems are fire adapted. Grasslands, savannas, chaparral, and some forests experience regular fires that shape their structure and composition. Plants in these ecosystems have evolved various strategies to survive or even benefit from fire. Some plants have thick bark that insulates living tissue from heat. Ponderosa pine, for example, can survive low-intensity fires that kill other species. Some plants store energy in underground structures like bulbs or rhizomes, allowing them to resprout quickly after fire burns the above-ground portions. Other plants have evolved to release seeds after fire. Fire stimulates germination in some species, either through heat or through chemical signals and smoke. The result is a pulse of new growth after fire, taking advantage of the cleared ground, reduced competition, and pulse of nutrients released from burned organic matter. Fire suppression, a policy adopted in many regions during the 20th century, has had unintended consequences. In fire-adapted ecosystems, excluding fire leads to accumulation of fuel, making eventual fires more intense and destructive. It also allows fire-sensitive species to invade, changing community composition. Many land managers now use prescribed burns to mimic natural fire regimes and maintain ecosystem health. In short, what seems like devastation from one angle may be, from another, an opportunity. Biomes on Earth are broadly categorized into terrestrial and aquatic groups. Terrestrial biomes, situated on land, exhibit considerable diversity and are grouped into major types to help organize the complexity of ecosystems. While these categories are useful, they inevitably mask the finer details. For example, the relative abundance of plant life in the Sonoran Desert in the United States compared to the stark desolation of Boa Vista, a desert island off Western Africa. Both are deserts, but each tells a very different ecological story. There are 8 principal terrestrial biomes: tropical wet forests, savannas, subtropical deserts, chaparral, temperate grasslands, temperate forests, boreal forests, and Arctic tundra. Each is defined by characteristic ranges of temperature and precipitation, with seasonal variations in both helping to shape the flora and fauna found there. While a biome can be associated with specific regions, similar climate conditions can create similar biomes in entirely different geographic locations. Some biomes, like temperate grasslands and temperate forests, experience well-defined seasons with hot summers and cold winters. In contrast, tropical wet forests enjoy warm temperatures and abundant moisture year-round, resulting in high net primary productivity. Other biomes, such as deserts and tundra, are less productive due to harsh temperatures and limited water availability. The identity of each terrestrial biome lies in its distinct combination of temperature range and precipitation pattern. Tropical wet forests, or tropical rainforests, are located near the equator. Their vegetation is dominated by broad-leafed plants that shed foliage not seasonally, but steadily throughout the year. These forests are considered evergreen, not because individual leaves never fall, but because some are always falling and growing back. They operate in a world without seasonal shifts in sunlight or temperature, with temperatures ranging from 20 to 34 degrees Celsius and consistent daylight of 11 to 16 hours, 12 hours per day. These biomes enjoy an uninterrupted growing season. Rainfall is abundant, ranging annually from 125 to 660 centimeters, 50 to 200 inches, though it does fluctuate month to month. Even the driest month in a tropical wet forest typically receives more rain than some entire biomes do in a year. This climatic stability and moisture abundance drive high plant growth, resulting in significant biomass and extraordinary biodiversity. A single hectare of South American tropical forest may contain between 100 and 300 tree species. These forests are also vertically complex. The forest floor is sparsely vegetated and strewn with decomposing plant matter. Above it lies the understory of short, leafy shrubs. Rising beyond that are taller trees, forming a closed upper canopy, and still higher, emergent trees pierce through to the open sky. This layered structure provides a wealth of habitats for plants, fungi, animals, and other organisms. Many species spend their entire lives high above the ground, well adapted to an arboreal existence. Epiphytes, plants that grow harmlessly on other plants, are a common sight throughout this biome. The complexity of tropical rainforests extends beyond vertical stratification. The dense vegetation creates countless microhabitats each with its own temperature, humidity, and light conditions. A bromeliad growing in the fork of a tree branch becomes a miniature aquatic ecosystem, holding water that supports frogs, insects, and even small fish. The surface of a single leaf may harbor fungi, bacteria, and microscopic animals. This structural complexity supports extraordinary biodiversity. While tropical rainforests cover less than 7% of Earth's land surface, they contain more than half of all terrestrial species. A single tree may host hundreds of species of insects. A hectare of forest may contain more bird species than all of North America. Savannas, in contrast, are tropical grasslands with scattered trees found in Africa, South America, and northern Australia. They are warm year-round, with average temperatures ranging from 24 to 29 degrees Celsius, 75 to 84 degrees Fahrenheit, and they receive between 10 and 20 inches of rainfall per year, 40 centimeters, 3.9 to 15.7 inches of rain per year. A lengthy dry season limits the growth of dense tree cover. Instead, grasses and herbaceous plants dominate. Fire is a frequent and natural occurrence in this biome, and plants have evolved strong root systems to survive and regrow after a burn. The trees that do occur in savannas are typically fire-resistant or fire-adapted. Acacia trees in African savannas have thick bark and deep roots. Baobabs store water in their massive trunks and can resprout even after severe burning. Many savanna trees are deciduous, shedding leaves during the dry season to reduce water loss. The grasses that dominate savannas are highly productive despite the long dry season. They grow rapidly during the wet season, taking advantage of rain and warm temperatures. Many produce seeds that can survive drought and fire. Their extensive root systems store energy and nutrients, allowing quick regrowth after fire or grazing. Savannas support large populations of grazing mammals. The African savanna, in particular, is famous for its spectacular assemblages of zebras, wildebeest, gazelles, elephants, and their predators. These large herbivores are migratory, following seasonal patterns of rainfall and new grass growth across vast distances. Subtropical deserts lie roughly between 15 and 30 degrees latitude in both hemispheres, centered around the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. These are extremely dry regions. In some years, evaporation outpaces precipitation entirely. In hot deserts, daytime soil temperatures can exceed 60 degrees Celsius, 140 degrees Fahrenheit, while nights bring freezing conditions. Cold deserts experience daytime highs up to 25 degrees Celsius and nighttime lows below -30. Annual rainfall rarely exceeds 30 centimeters and is erratic at best. Some areas, like Central Australia and parts of Northern Africa, may see as little as 2 centimeters, 0.8 inches, of rain in an entire year. Desert ecosystems, particularly those that are extremely arid, are shaped by scarce and unpredictable rainfall. In these settings, the vegetation is sparse and animal diversity is relatively low. Perennial plants, those that live for more than 1 year, are often absent in the driest deserts. Instead, many plant species are annuals, capable of germinating, growing, reproducing, and dying in the brief window of favorable conditions that follows rare rainfalls. Those plants that do persist between rains often do so with an arsenal of adaptations: deep roots to tap underground moisture, reduced foliage to minimize water loss, and thick water-storing stems. Seeds may lie dormant for years, awaiting the right conditions. Desert wildflowers provide spectacular displays when conditions align. Seeds that have waited years or even decades for rain can germinate within days of adequate moisture. Plants grow, flower, and set seed within weeks, sometimes producing carpets of color across landscapes that were barren just days before. Then they die, leaving seeds to wait for the next rain. Animal life similarly adapts through behaviors such as burrowing and being active mainly at night to avoid daytime heat. Desert animals face the challenge of finding water in an environment where it's scarce and unpredictable. Many get all the water they need from their food, never drinking at all. Kangaroo rats, for example, can survive indefinitely on dry seeds, producing metabolic water from the breakdown of carbohydrates. Other adaptations include concentrated urine to minimize water loss, specialized kidneys, and the ability to tolerate higher body temperatures that reduce the need for evaporative cooling. Some desert animals, like camels, can tolerate significant dehydration and then rapidly rehydrate when water becomes available. The chaparral, or scrub forest, is found in places like California, the Mediterranean basin, and coastal Australia. This biome receives between 65 and 75 centimeters, 25.6 to 29.5 inches of rain annually, most of which falls in winter. Summers are dry, and many plant species lie dormant during this season. The vegetation is dominated by shrubs, many of which are fire adapted. Some plants require fire to trigger germination. The ash left behind by fires returns nutrients like nitrogen to the soil, fostering regrowth in the aftermath. Chaparral plants often have small, thick, waxy leaves that reduce water loss. Many are sclerophyllous, meaning hard-leafed, an adaptation to both drought and nutrient-poor soils. The shrubs grow densely, forming nearly impenetrable thickets in mature stands. Fire plays a crucial ecological role in chaparral. Many plant species accumulate oils and resins in their tissues, making them highly flammable. This seems counterintuitive, but it ensures hot, fast-moving fires that clear the landscape and trigger germination of fire-adapted seeds. Some seeds won't germinate at all without exposure to heat or chemicals and smoke. After fire, chaparral communities regenerate through two strategies. Some species resprout from underground burrows or root crowns that survive the fire. Others regenerate from seeds, often producing dense stands of seedlings that take advantage of increased light and nutrients. Over time, as the shrubs mature, the community accumulates fuel, setting the stage for the next fire. Temperate grasslands, called prairies in North America and steppes in Eurasia, are marked by dramatic seasonal temperature swings, hot summers and cold winters. These variations define the growing season, with plants emerging in spring, flourishing through summer, and winding down in fall. Winter brings dormancy, as water is locked in ice and temperatures fall below the threshold for growth. Annual precipitation ranges from 25 to 75 centimeters, 9.8 to 29.5 inches, with trees mostly limited to riverbanks. Grasses dominate the landscape, supported by fertile soils densely packed with roots and rhizomes. These underground structures not only anchor plants but also replenish soil organic matter as they decay. Fire is a regular disturbance, often started by lightning. In fact, fire suppression can lead to the invasion of shrubs and trees, and so controlled burns are sometimes used to preserve the character of the grassland. The soils of temperate grasslands are among the most fertile on Earth. The deep, dark topsoil, rich in organic matter, results from thousands of years of grass growth and decay. These soils store enormous amounts of carbon and nutrients. Unfortunately, their fertility made them prime targets for conversion to agriculture. Much of the world's grain is now grown on former grasslands, and only fragments of the original ecosystems remain. Native grasslands supported vast herds of grazing mammals. In North America, bison numbered in the tens of millions before European settlement. In Asia, wild horses, saiga antelope, and other grazers roamed the steppes. These large herbivores shaped the ecosystems through grazing, which stimulated plant growth, and through their wallowing and trampling, which created disturbance patches that increased habitat diversity. Temperate forests, common in parts of North America, Europe, Asia, Chile, and New Zealand, occupy mid-latitude regions and experience temperatures from -30 to 30 degrees Celsius or -22 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit, with evenly distributed rainfall ranging from 75 to 150 centimeters, 29.5 to 59 inches annually. These forests have well-defined seasons. Deciduous trees dominate, losing their leaves each fall and entering dormancy through winter. This pattern results in lower net primary productivity than tropical wet forests, and fewer tree species overall. The forest canopy provides substantial shade, though not as extensively as in tropical forests, and the trees here are typically shorter. The forest floor is layered with leaf litter, a valuable source of nutrients and habitat. As it decomposes, this litter enriches the soil and supports a range of invertebrates and their predators, such as the red-backed salamander. The seasonal leaf fall in temperate forests creates a distinctive annual rhythm. In autumn, before shedding their leaves, trees withdraw nutrients and store them in roots and wood. The leaves change color as chlorophyll breaks down, revealing other pigments that were always present, but masked by green. The brilliant reds, oranges, and yellows of fall foliage are a side effect of this nutrient recovery process. The thick layer of leaf litter on the forest floor supports a complex decomposer community. Fungi and bacteria begin the breakdown process. Softened leaves are then consumed by invertebrates like earthworms, millipedes, and springtails. Their feeding fragments the litter and mixes it with mineral soil, creating the rich humus layer characteristic of temperate forest soils. This decomposition releases nutrients that trees will take up the following spring. The cycle is remarkably efficient, with nutrients retained within the system rather than lost to leaching or erosion. This internal recycling allows temperate forests to maintain productivity on soils that might otherwise be nutrient poor. Boreal forests, or taiga, lie just south of the Arctic and span much of Canada, Alaska, Russia, and northern Europe. These forests endure long, dry winters and short, cool, moist summers. Annual precipitation ranges from 40 to 100 centimeters, 15.7 to 39 inches, mostly as snow. Evaporation is minimal due to persistent cold. The vegetation is dominated by evergreen conifers, like pines and spruces, adapted to retain their needle-like leaves year-round. These needles are more energy efficient to maintain than the broad leaves of deciduous trees, allowing conifers to photosynthesize earlier in spring. The soil in boreal forests is typically acidic and nitrogen poor because needles decompose slowly. Nutrient cycling is sluggish, contributing to low plant diversity and lower net primary productivity compared to more temperate biomes. Still, boreal forests store considerable above-ground biomass due to the longevity of their trees. Structurally, they are simpler than tropical forests, often comprising just a tree layer and a ground layer. The boreal forest is the world's largest terrestrial biome, forming a nearly continuous belt across the northern continents. Despite its extent, biodiversity is relatively low. A few tree species dominate vast areas: black spruce, white spruce, jack pine, and tamarack in North America, Scots pine, Norway spruce, and larch in Eurasia. The understory is often sparse, consisting of mosses, lichens, and low shrubs like blueberry and Labrador tea. The dense conifer canopy and thick layer of needle litter create acidic, nutrient-poor conditions that few plants can tolerate. Wildfire is frequent in boreal forests, often started by lightning. These fires can be intense and extensive, sometimes burning millions of hectares. Many boreal species are adapted to fire. Jack pine cones remain closed until heated by fire, then release seeds into the cleared landscape. Aspen and birch, pioneer species, quickly colonize burned areas before being eventually replaced by slower growing conifers. North of the boreal forest lies the Arctic tundra, stretching across the upper reaches of the northern hemisphere. Winters are severe, averaging negative 34 degrees Celsius, while summers are brief and cool, with temperatures ranging from 3 to 12 degrees Celsius, 52 degrees Fahrenheit. The growing season is only about 10 to 12 weeks, but nearly continuous daylight during this period enables rapid plant growth. Precipitation is low, and like the boreal forest, evaporation is minimal. Tundra vegetation is typically low-lying due to strong winds and the presence of permafrost, permanently frozen ground that inhibits root growth and slows organic decay. This limits nutrient availability and results in low primary productivity, minimal above-ground biomass, and sparse species diversity. However, during the brief summer, the tundra can be carpeted with mosses, lichens, and small flowering plants, taking full advantage of the short window of relative abundance. The permafrost layer, which can extend hundreds of meters deep, prevents water from draining through the soil. As a result, the surface soil becomes waterlogged during summer thaw, creating extensive wetlands despite low precipitation. These wetlands provide crucial breeding habitat for millions of migratory birds that arrive from around the world to nest during the brief Arctic summer. Tundra plants have evolved remarkable adaptations to extreme conditions. Many grow in cushion or mat forms that resist wind and trap heat. Some have dark-colored leaves that absorb maximum solar radiation. Others produce antifreeze compounds to protect against frost, even in midsummer. Animals of the tundra must cope with extreme seasonal changes. Some, like caribou and many birds, migrate south for winter. Others, like lemmings and Arctic hares, remain active year-round, burrowing through snow to find food. Still others, like Arctic ground squirrels, hibernate for up to 8 months. Climate change is affecting the Arctic more rapidly than any other region on Earth. Permafrost is thawing. Shrubs are expanding into areas formerly dominated by grasses and sedges, and the entire character of the tundra is shifting. These changes have profound implications, not just for Arctic ecosystems, but for global climate. As thawing permafrost releases stored carbon and methane, aquatic biomes, encompassing both saltwater and freshwater ecosystems, operate under a different set of rules than their terrestrial counterparts. While many of the same abiotic factors, temperature, nutrients, are relevant, the medium of water brings its own set of complexities. Sunlight, which governs the structure of terrestrial systems, such as forests, is equally pivotal in aquatic environments, particularly where water depth becomes a limiting factor for light penetration. Even in the clearest water, light absorption occurs naturally. As one descends into a body of water, there comes a point where sunlight can no longer reach. This is not simply a matter of visibility. It defines the boundary for where photosynthesis and thus many forms of life can occur. On land, transient factors like fog or dust might obscure sunlight, but these are temporary. In water, the decline of light with depth is constant and predictable, shaping entire ecosystems. In freshwater systems, stratification, layering based on temperature and density, is one of the most critical abiotic forces. It controls nutrient cycling, influences oxygen distribution, and is closely tied to the energy dynamics of light. Water's thermal properties, its tendency to heat and cool slowly, affect everything from local lake conditions to global climate systems. In marine systems, the influence of large-scale water movements, currents, is pronounced. These currents distribute heat and nutrients across vast distances and play a substantial role in regulating Earth's weather patterns. While freshwater systems have currents of their own, especially in rivers, these large-scale circulations are far less significant in lakes and ponds. The ocean itself is divided into various zones that help describe both depth and proximity to land. The entire open water column is called the pelagic realm, stretching from the surface all the way down. The benthic realm, by contrast, runs along the ocean floor from shallow coastal areas to the deepest trenches. Within the pelagic zone lies the photic zone, the upper layer, roughly the top 200 meters, about 650 feet, where sunlight can still penetrate. This is the domain of photosynthetic organisms like phytoplankton. Below this lies the aphotic zone, a vast expanse where sunlight fails to reach. The majority of the ocean, in fact, is aphotic. Dark, cold, and inhospitable to photosynthesis. At its most extreme, the ocean plunges to the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench, the deepest known point in the ocean, reaching a depth of about 11,000 meters, or roughly 6.8 miles. For comparison, the average depth of the ocean is around 4,267 meters, or about 14,000 feet. These zones, photic and aphotic, pelagic and benthic, are not unique to the ocean. They also apply to large freshwater lakes, where depth, light, and temperature similarly define the structure and function of aquatic life. The ocean, the planet's largest marine biome, is a vast and continuous expanse of salt water with a surprisingly uniform chemical composition. A dilute mix of mineral salts and decomposed biological material. Within this immense body, we find three notable marine subbiomes: coral reefs, estuaries, and the open ocean itself. Ocean life is largely shaped by how far light penetrates the water column. Zones are defined by depth and light availability, and each supports its own suite of organisms adapted to the distinct conditions there. Closest to shore lies the intertidal zone, the region between high and low tide. While many picture this as a sandy beach, it can just as easily be rocky or muddy. It's an environment in flux, submerged during high tide, exposed during low. Organisms here must endure both dry periods and relentless wave action. Shoreline species, such as the shore crab, possess hard exoskeletons, providing protection from desiccation and physical stress. The constant agitation of water and sediment means that few rooted plants or algae can gain a foothold. Just beyond is the neritic zone, stretching from the edge of the intertidal zone out to about 200 meters deep, roughly where the continental shelf ends. This zone receives ample sunlight, allowing photosynthesis to thrive. Water here is well oxygenated and relatively stable in both temperature and pressure. Floating algae like sargassum provide habitat, while plankton, both plant and animal, form the base of a rich food web that supports small fish, shrimp, and the bulk of global fisheries. Farther out lies the oceanic zone, the open ocean beyond the continental shelf. This region experiences thermal stratification, with warm and cold waters mixing due to currents. Though rich in plankton, nutrients are generally scarce here, making this zone less productive than neritic waters. Dead organisms that once lived near the surface sink to the depths. But unlike freshwater systems, the open ocean lacks a mechanism for circulating those nutrients back to the surface. As a result, much of the deeper ocean relies on a slow rain of biological material from above. Below the pelagic zones lies the benthic realm, the seafloor, extending from the shoreline to the deepest ocean trenches. Here, the substrate is composed of sand, silt, and the remains of fallen organisms. As depth increases, temperature drops but stays just above freezing. The benthic realm is nutrient-rich, due to the accumulation of organic debris and supports a wide array of life, including sponges, anemones, marine worms, and bottom-dwelling fish. At the bottom of the abyss lies the abyssal zone, found at depths of 4,000 meters and beyond. Conditions here are harsh, intense pressure, near freezing temperatures, and almost complete darkness. Despite the high oxygen levels, nutrients are sparse. Still, life persists. Fishes and invertebrates, adapted to the cold and dark, live off nutrients delivered from above at hydrothermal vents scattered across the ocean floor. Chemosynthetic bacteria exploit hydrogen sulfide and other minerals as energy sources, anchoring a food web independent of sunlight. Coral reefs form a second major marine biome and are typically found in warm, shallow waters within the photic zone, often between 30 degrees north and south latitude. These structures are built by colonial marine invertebrates, corals, which secrete calcium carbonate skeletons over time. Coral reefs can be adjacent to land, fringing reefs, circular around submerged islands, atolls, or extensive offshore formations like the Great Barrier Reef. Most shallow water corals have a symbiotic relationship with photosynthetic algae, which supply much of the energy the corals need in nutrient-poor tropical waters. In deeper, colder waters, where light is scarce or absent, corals lack these algal partners and instead rely on stinging tentacles to catch prey. Coral reefs are among the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth, supporting over 4,000 species of fish. Some fish feed directly on coral, others graze on algae or inhabit the cryptofauna, the myriad invertebrates tucked into the coral's calcium framework. At the reef's edge, one finds an assortment of predators, herbivores, and planktivores. Predators hunt other animals. Herbivores consume plant matter. And planktivores feast on the drifting plankton that sustains so many oceanic food webs. The complexity of coral reefs rivals that of tropical rainforests. A single reef may contain thousands of species, from microscopic bacteria to sharks several meters long. The coral structure provides countless niches, crevices for hiding, surfaces for attachment, and substrates for filter feeders. Coral reefs also provide crucial ecosystem services to humans. They protect coastlines from storm damage, support fisheries that feed millions of people, and generate billions of dollars in tourism revenue. Yet they're among the most threatened ecosystems on Earth. Rising ocean temperatures cause coral bleaching, where stressed corals expel their symbiotic algae and often die. Ocean acidification weakens coral skeletons. Pollution, overfishing, and physical damage all contribute to reef decline. Freshwater biomes encompass lakes and panang, rivers and streams, and wetlands. These environments provide essential ecosystem services to humans, including drinking water, irrigation, sanitation, and industrial support. Because lakes and ponds are set within terrestrial landscapes, they are shaped by the abiotic and biotic conditions of those surroundings. Lakes and ponds vary greatly in size, from small backyard pools to expansive inland seas. Temperature plays a significant role in structuring life within them. In summer, these bodies of water become thermally stratified. The surface warms under the sun, while deeper layers remain cool, preventing mixing. The photic zone, where sunlight penetrates, is home to phytoplankton such as algae and cyanobacteria. These organisms carry out photosynthesis and form the foundation of the aquatic food web. Zooplankton, such as rotifers and small crustaceans, feed on phytoplankton, while bacteria break down sinking organic matter in the aphotic depths. Nitrogen and phosphorus are crucial limiting nutrients in these systems. When excess amounts enter the water, typically from agricultural runoff or sewage, they trigger algal blooms. These blooms can block sunlight, effectively turning the entire water column aphotic. When the algae die and decompose, they consume vast quantities of oxygen, creating so-called dead zones where most aquatic life cannot survive. Such ecological disruptions are common, notably in places like Lake Erie and the Gulf of Mexico. The process of eutrophication, nutrient enrichment leading to excessive plant growth, has transformed countless freshwater systems worldwide. Clear lakes have become turbid and choked with algae. Fish populations have collapsed as oxygen levels plummet. In extreme cases, toxic cyanobacteria blooms produce poisons that threaten wildlife and human health. Rivers and streams are defined by constant movement, transporting water from headwaters to lakes or oceans. The source water, the origin point, is typically clear, cold, and low in nutrients. The channel at this point is narrow and the current fast, which discourages sediment accumulation and phytoplankton growth. Instead, photosynthesis is carried out by algae attached to rocks. Energy also enters these ecosystems from surrounding terrestrial environments, such as when leaves fall into the water and decompose, contributing nutrients. Organisms here are adapted to the fast flow. Leeches, for example, anchor themselves with suckers, while trout, a key predator, are streamlined for swift currents. As rivers travel away from their source, they widen, slow, and warm. Sediment begins to accumulate, allowing phytoplankton to thrive. This makes the water murkier. Worms and insects burrow into the mud. Invertebrates such as frogs, fish, and waterfowl, relying less on sight and more on taste or chemical detection, hunt in these quieter waters. The concept of the river continuum recognizes that rivers change continuously from source to mouth. Each section supports different communities adapted to local conditions of flow, temperature, substrate, and nutrients. Understanding this continuum is essential for river conservation, as impacts in one section can affect communities far downstream. Wetlands are shallow ecosystems where soil is permanently or periodically saturated. Unlike lakes, wetlands are defined by emergent vegetation, plants rooted in waterlogged soil with parts extending above the surface. These systems include marshes, swamps, bogs, mudflats, and salt marshes. They all share three defining traits: saturated soil hydrology, water-loving vegetation, and water-adapted soils. Marshes and swamps have slow, steady water flow. Bogs, on the other hand, develop in areas with little or no water movement. These typically form in depressions with clay bottoms that prevent water from percolating through the soil. As a result, water is stagnant, oxygen depleted and decomposition is slow. This leads to an accumulation of organic acids, lowering the water's pH. At these lower pH levels, nitrogen becomes unavailable, an essential nutrient for plant growth. Some bog plants, like sundews, pitcher plants, and Venus flytraps, adapt by capturing and digesting insects to extract nitrogen. Because of the limited nutrients and oxygen, bogs have low net primary productivity. Wetlands provide invaluable ecosystem services despite covering only a small fraction of Earth's surface. They filter pollutants from water, reduce flooding by storing excess water, recharge groundwater aquifers, and provide habitat for countless species. More than a third of threatened and endangered species in the United States depend on wetlands. Estuaries are unique biomes where freshwater rivers meet the ocean, creating brackish environments with fluctuating salinity. These areas serve as vital nurseries for many marine species, offering protection and a rich, though physiologically challenging, environment. The salinity in estuaries shifts frequently with the tides, creating short-term changes that test the adaptability of their inhabitants. Many plants in estuaries are halophytes, salt-tolerant species. Some use root filters to remove salt, while others pump oxygen into their roots. Animal life includes mollusks like mussels and clams, which adapt behaviorally to changing salinity. When exposed to low salinity, they close their shells, cease feeding, and switch to anaerobic respiration. When high tide returns, bringing more oxygen and higher salinity, they open their shells and resume normal functions. It's a delicate, energy-intensive, balancing act in a habitat defined by constant change. Estuaries are among the most productive ecosystems on Earth. The mixing of freshwater and saltwater creates complex circulation patterns that trap nutrients. Detritus from both terrestrial and marine sources accumulates in estuarine sediments, supporting rich communities of decomposers and detritivores. These, in turn, support the fish, crabs, shrimp, and other animals that make estuaries such important nursery grounds. Imagine spending a quiet afternoon boating down a sunlit river when suddenly you're struck in the head by a 20-pound silver carp. This isn't hypothetical. In rivers and canals across Illinois and Missouri, the presence of Asian carp has made such incidents possible, if not exactly common, then certainly no longer outlandish. This group of species, which includes the silver, black grass and the iboi and bighead carp, has been a staple of aquaculture in China for over 1,000 years. There, it's a valued food source. In the United States, however, these carp are invasive, disrupting the balance of aquatic communities and threatening native species. Populations are not static. They change in size and distribution due to a host of influences ranging from seasonal shifts and natural disasters to competition between and within species. The study of how populations fluctuate over time, population dynamics, falls under the broader field of demography. Tools like life tables, once used by insurance companies to estimate human life expectancy, are now used to understand the life cycles and survival rates of everything from insects to elephants. When examining a population, The first task is usually to estimate how many individuals there are and how they are spaced. Population size and population density form the foundation of this understanding. Larger populations may benefit from greater genetic diversity, potentially giving them a survival edge. Conversely, in a population with low density, individuals may struggle to find mates, even if total numbers are sufficient. The most accurate population count would be a complete census, counting every individual. This is rarely feasible. Instead, scientists employ sampling methods. For immobile or slow-moving species, the quadrat technique is commonly used. A quadrat is a square frame of known size, laid randomly throughout the study area. Researchers count organisms inside each square, repeating the process enough times to generate a reliable estimate. For more mobile creatures, mark and recapture is preferred. A sample of animals is captured, marked harmlessly, and released. After some time, a second sample is taken, and the ratio of marked to unmarked animals estimates the total population. Modern technology has expanded the ecologist's toolkit. Radio telemetry and GPS tracking allow researchers to follow individual animals over large areas and long time periods. Camera traps automatically photograph animals, allowing population estimates based on individual identification. Acoustic monitoring records animal calls, useful for species that are heard more often than seen. Environmental DNA, genetic material shed by organisms into water or soil, allows detection of species that are otherwise difficult to observe. Beyond numbers, researchers look at distribution patterns. These patterns reveal whether individuals cluster, spread evenly, or scatter randomly, reflecting underlying biological and environmental forces. Dispersion patterns fall into three main categories: uniform, random, and clumped. Uniform dispersion is often seen in species that compete directly for space or resources. Random dispersion arises when individuals spread without predictable patterns. Clumped dispersion, perhaps most common in nature, occurs when organisms aggregate for social, reproductive, or resource-related reasons. Creosote bushes in the Mojave Desert display uniform spacing. Each bush secretes chemicals that inhibit the germination and growth of other creosote bushes nearby, a phenomenon called allelopathy. The result is a remarkably regular pattern across the landscape, with bushes evenly spaced like trees in an orchard. Clumped dispersion is common for many reasons. Resources are often patchily distributed, and organisms congregate where resources are abundant. Many animals gain protection from predators by living in groups. Social species form family groups or larger herds. Seeds often fall near parent plants, creating clusters of related individuals. Understanding dispersion patterns helps ecologists predict how populations will respond to environmental changes, disease outbreaks, or conservation interventions. While population size and density describe a population at a single moment, demography studies how populations change over time, focusing on birth rates, death rates, and life expectancy. Population growth or decline hinges on the relationship between births and deaths. If equal, the population is stable. If births exceed deaths, it grows. If deaths outpace births, it shrinks. Life tables break populations into age cohorts and provide statistics on mortality and survival. These tables show how many individuals die at each age interval and expected remaining lifespan. Survivorship curves graph surviving individuals over time. Type 1 curves show low mortality early in life and increasing mortality with age, typical of humans. Type 2 curves indicate roughly constant death rates across ages seen in birds. Type 3 curves display high juvenile mortality found in trees and fish that produce vast numbers of offspring. These different survivorship patterns reflect different life history strategies. Type 1 species invest heavily in each offspring, providing parental care and protection. Type 3 species produce enormous numbers of offspring with little or no parental investment, relying on the law of averages to ensure some survive. A species' life history encompasses how energy is allocated to growth, maintenance, and reproduction. Energy is the limiting factor. All organisms need it, and none have enough to do everything at once. One key trait is fecundity, the potential reproductive capacity. High fecundity species produce many offspring with little parental involvement. Low fecundity species produce fewer offspring, but invest significant energy in raising them. The timing of reproduction is another strategic axis. Reproducing early increases chances of passing on genes, but often limits growth. Reproducing later can lead to better prepared parents, but risks not surviving to reproductive age. Reproductive strategies broadly group into semelparity and iteroparity. Semelparity means reproducing once, then dying, like bamboo or salmon. Iteroparity means reproducing multiple times over a lifespan, like humans or many birds. Semelparous species often invest everything in a single massive reproductive event. Pacific salmon exemplify this strategy perfectly. Born in freshwater streams, they migrate to the ocean, where they spend years feeding and growing. When the time comes, they return to their natal streams, swimming hundreds of kilometers upstream against powerful currents. Upon arrival, they spawn once, releasing thousands of eggs, and then die. Their bodies decompose in the stream, returning nutrients to the ecosystem that will nourish their offspring. This single reproductive event is so energetically costly that survival afterward is impossible. The salmon stop eating once they enter fresh water. Their bodies begin to deteriorate even before spawning. But the strategy works. The massive nutrient input from decomposing salmon bodies enriches streams, stimulating algae and invertebrate growth that feeds juvenile salmon. Bears, eagles, and other predators carry salmon carcasses into forests, distributing marine nutrients far inland. Heteroporous species take the opposite approach. They reproduce multiple times, spreading reproductive effort across years or decades. This allows them to adjust reproduction based on conditions. In good years, they might produce many offspring. In poor years, they might skip reproduction entirely, conserving energy for survival. Trees provide clear examples of heteroparity. An oak tree might live for centuries, producing acorns annually. Some years produce massed years with enormous acorn crops. Other years produce almost nothing. This variability makes it difficult for seed predators to completely consume the seed crop. In mast years, predators become satiated, allowing many acorns to escape predation and germinate. Environmental conditions profoundly influence life history strategies. In stable, predictable environments, slower growing species with lower reproductive rates often dominate. In unstable or frequently disturbed environments, fast-growing species with high reproductive rates have the advantage. These patterns are sometimes described using the concepts of R selection and K selection. The letter R represents the intrinsic rate of population increase, while K represents carrying capacity. R-selected species maximize reproductive rate, producing many offspring quickly. K-selected species maximize survival in competitive environments near carrying capacity. Weedy plants are typically R-selected. They germinate quickly, grow rapidly, and produce abundant seeds before dying. They're colonizers, quick to exploit disturbed habitats. Dandelions exemplify this strategy, producing hundreds of wind-dispersed seeds and thriving in lawns, gardens, and disturbed ground. Large mammals tend toward K-selection. Elephants have long gestation periods, produce single offspring, and invest years in parental care. They grow slowly and live long lives. This strategy works in stable environments where competition is intense, but conditions are relatively predictable. Of course, no species is purely R or K selected. These represent ends of a continuum, and most species fall somewhere in between, with life history traits shaped by the particular challenges of their environment. Populations have the potential for exponential growth when resources are unlimited. Each individual produces multiple offspring, which themselves reproduce, creating an accelerating curve. The intrinsic rate of increase, R, describes how quickly a population grows under ideal conditions. In reality, exponential growth cannot continue indefinitely. Resources are finite. Space is limited. Eventually, something constrains population size. This limitation defines the carrying capacity. K, the maximum population size an environment can sustain. As populations approach carrying capacity, growth slows. Birth rates decline, death rates increase, the population stabilizes around an equilibrium where births roughly equal deaths. This produces a logistic growth curve, S-shaped, beginning with exponential increase, transitioning through rapid but decelerating growth, and finally leveling off near carrying capacity. Many factors can limit population growth. Density-dependent factors increase in intensity as population density rises. Competition for food intensifies. Disease spreads more easily. Predators concentrate. Where prey is abundant, waste products accumulate. Density-independent factors affect populations regardless of density. Severe weather, natural disasters, and seasonal changes impact populations whether dense or sparse. A hard freeze kills tropical plants, regardless of how many there are. A hurricane destroys nesting sites, whether occupied by 10 pairs or 10,000. Understanding these dynamics is crucial for conservation and management. Endangered species often exist below carrying capacity, limited by factors other than resources. Removing these limiting factors, protecting habitat, controlling predators, supplementing food, can allow population recovery. Conversely, some populations exceed carrying capacity, at least temporarily. They grow beyond what the environment can sustain long term, then crash when resources are depleted. Deer populations without predators often follow this pattern, increasing until they overbrowse their habitat, then declining through starvation. While population ecology focuses on single species, community ecology examines how multiple species interact. Communities are assemblages of populations occupying the same area, connected through feeding relationships, competition, mutualism, and other interactions. The complexity of these interactions can be staggering. In a single hectare of tropical forest, hundreds of plant species coexist with thousands of animal species, millions of insects, and countless microorganisms. Each interacts with others in ways both obvious and subtle. Species interactions fall into several categories. Predation, where one species kills and consumes another. Competition, where species vie for the same limited resources. Mutualism, where both species benefit. Commensalism, where one benefits and the other is unaffected. Parasitism, where one benefits at the expense of the other. These interactions shape community structure, influencing which species coexist, their relative abundances, and the flow of energy and nutrients through the system. When species require the same resources, they compete. The competitive exclusion principle states that two species cannot occupy exactly the same niche indefinitely. Eventually, one outcompetes the other, leading to local extinction of the inferior competitor. However, many similar species coexist by partitioning resources. They might feed at different times, use different parts of resources, or specialize on different prey sizes. This niche differentiation reduces direct competition, allowing coexistence. Warblers in North American forests provide a classic example. Multiple species forage in the same trees but partition the habitat vertically. Some feed in the canopy, others in the mid-level, still others near the ground. Some glean insects from leaves, others probe bark crevices, others catch flying insects. These subtle differences reduce competition enough to permit coexistence. Character displacement occurs when competition drives evolutionary divergence. Where two species overlap geographically, they evolve differences in traits related to resource use. Where they don't overlap, they remain similar. Darwin's finches show this pattern. On islands with multiple finch species, beak sizes diverge, reducing competition for seeds. On islands with single species, beak sizes remain intermediate. Predators shape prey populations and community structure. By consuming prey, they limit prey numbers. But predators often don't simply reduce prey populations uniformly. They selectively consume certain individuals, the young, old, sick, or unwary, influencing not just prey abundance but also prey evolution. Predators drive prey adaptations. Speed, camouflage, defensive structures all evolve in response to predation pressure. Prey, in turn, drive predator adaptations. Faster prey select for faster predators. better hidden prey select for keener predator senses. This coevolution produces the diversity of forms we see in nature. Keystone predators have disproportionate effects on community structure. Sea otters in kelp forests are a prime example. Otters prey on sea urchins. Without otters, urchin populations explode and overgraze kelp, transforming diverse kelp forests into barren urchin zones. With otters controlling urchins, kelp thrives, supporting diverse communities of fish and invertebrates. Herbivory, the consumption of plants by animals, functions similarly to predation. Large herbivores shape plant communities through selective feeding. In African savannas, elephants knock down trees, maintaining grasslands. Without elephants, trees encroach, converting grassland to woodland. Plants defend themselves against herbivores with physical and chemical defenses. Thorns, spines, and tough leaves provide physical barriers. Toxic compounds, like nicotine in tobacco or tannins in oak leaves, poison or deter herbivores. Some plants even recruit predators, releasing chemicals when damaged that attract insects that prey on herbivores. Not all interactions are antagonistic. Mutualism, where both species benefit, is widespread and shapes ecosystems profoundly. Pollination mutualisms link flowering plants and their animal pollinators. Plants provide nectar and pollen as food. Animals transport pollen between flowers, enabling plant reproduction. This interaction has driven extraordinary coevolution. Flowers evolve shapes, colors, and scents matched to specific pollinators. Pollinators evolve mouthparts, behaviors, and sensory systems matched to specific flowers. Some mutualisms are so specialized that neither partner can survive without the other. Fig trees and fig wasps exemplify obligate mutualism. Each fig species has a specific wasp species that pollinates it. The wasp can only reproduce inside that fig species' fruit. Neither can exist without the other. Mycorrhizae represent another crucial mutualism. Most plants form associations with fungi that colonize their roots. The fungi extend far into soil, gathering nutrients and water beyond the root's reach. Plants provide fungi with sugars from photosynthesis. Both benefit. Most plants grow poorly without their fungal partners. Cleaning mutualisms occur throughout the ocean. Small fish or shrimp remove parasites from larger fish. The cleaners get food, their clients get parasite removal. Cleaner stations where these services are provided become focal points for reef communities. Communities change through time. Disturbances, events that remove or damage organisms, create opportunities for change. Following disturbance, communities undergo succession, a predictable sequence of change in species composition. Primary succession occurs on surfaces never before colonized. Newly formed volcanic islands, lava flows, or glacial retreat zones start with bare rock or sterile substrate. Pioneer species lichens, mosses, hardy grasses colonize first. They tolerate harsh conditions and modify the environment, breaking down rock, accumulating organic matter, and improving soil. As soil develops, more species can establish. Grasses and herbs give way to shrubs. Shrubs are eventually replaced by trees. Over centuries or millennia, the community develops complexity, eventually reaching a relatively stable state, though never truly static. Secondary succession follows disturbance in previously occupied areas. Abandoned agricultural fields, burned forests, or hurricane-damaged coastlines undergo secondary succession. Because soil and seed banks remain, succession proceeds more quickly than primary succession. Old field succession in eastern North America follows predictable patterns. First come annual weeds. These are replaced by perennial grasses and herbs. Shrubs invade after several years. Then fast-growing pioneer trees like aspen and birch. Eventually, slower-growing but shade-tolerant species like oak and maple dominate. Disturbance is not necessarily destructive. It maintains diversity in many ecosystems. Intermediate disturbance levels often support the highest diversity. Frequent severe disturbances prevent establishment of most species. Absence of disturbance allows competitive dominance to exclude others. Moderate disturbance creates a mosaic of different successional stages, supporting species adapted to various conditions. Energy flows through ecosystems in one direction, from sun to producers to consumers to decomposers, eventually dissipating as heat. This flow structures communities into trophic levels, feeding positions in food chains. Primary producers, plants, and photosynthetic microorganisms occupy the first trophic level. They capture solar energy and convert it to chemical energy in organic compounds. Primary consumers, herbivores, occupy the second level. They eat producers, acquiring energy stored in plant tissue. Secondary consumers, predators that eat herbivores, form the third level. Tertiary consumers, predators that eat other predators, may form additional levels. At each transfer between trophic levels, most energy is lost as heat through metabolism and inefficiency. Typically, only about 10% of energy passes from one level to the next. This limits the number of trophic levels an ecosystem can support. Because energy diminishes with each level, biomass generally decreases up the food chain. In most terrestrial ecosystems, plant biomass far exceeds herbivore biomass, which exceeds carnivore biomass, forming a pyramid of biomass. Food webs, the interconnected feeding relationships in communities, are more complex than simple linear food chains. Most organisms eat multiple food types and are themselves eaten by multiple predators. These webs create stability through redundancy. If one species declines, energy can flow through alternative pathways. And so as we approach the end of our journey tonight, we return to where we began, the study of connections. Ecology reveals a world far more interconnected than casual observation suggests. Every organism exists within a web of relationships, shaped by and shaping the world around it. From the microscopic bacteria fixing nitrogen in soil to the great whales swimming across oceans, from tropical rainforests to Arctic tundra, from tide pools to the deepest ocean trenches, life persists through adaptation, cooperation, competition, and constant change. These systems are not static exhibits, but dynamic processes. forever adjusting to shifting conditions, recovering from disturbances, evolving in response to new challenges. Understanding these patterns and processes gives us insight, not just into how nature works, but into our own place within it. Human activities now influence every ecosystem on Earth. We alter climate, transform landscapes, move species across continents, and extract resources at unprecedented scales. Ecology provides the knowledge needed to understand our impacts, and perhaps to minimize the damage. As you drift towards sleep, let these connections settle in your mind. The relationships between organisms and their environments, the flow of energy and cycling of nutrients, the delicate balances that sustain life in all its forms, the remarkable adaptations that allow survival in every conceivable habitat. Rest now, knowing that while you sleep, the ecosystems around you continue their ancient rhythms. Trees exchanging gases with the atmosphere, nocturnal predators hunting, decomposers breaking down organic matter, fungi extending their networks through soil. All connected, all interdependent, all part of the grand ecological tapestry. Sleep well. Dream of forests and oceans, of deserts and tundra, of all the living systems that make this planet home. And when you wake, perhaps you'll see the world with fresh eyes, recognizing the ecological relationships that connect all living things. Good night.